Sound check. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Happy Monday, guys. I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving weekend. We have so much to be thankful for. So I'm going to be talking tonight about the causes of gastrointestinal disease. And notice I say causes and not cause. I love how people will say, oh, we get to the, let me fix my mic here. Well, we get to the root cause. In reality, there's many different causes that can actually cause it. And I'm going to be talking about that tonight because a lot of people do run into things when it comes to, acid reflux, poor protein breakdown, leaky gut, bloating, um, constipation, diarrhea, things like that. And let's kind of break it down and give you guys the big idea behind that. So I'm going to talk about the causes of gastrointestinal disease. And notice I say causes and not cause, because disease is multifactorial, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit more detail. Before we do that, if you guys are joining me, say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. I always get a kick out of seeing people from all over the world that are watching the broadcast. So thank you very much for watching. And guys, if you have any kind of issues that are going on and you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure that you reach out and you join our next inflammation event, which is going to be Tuesday, December 10th at 6:00 p.m. We're going to talk about inflammation. I'll talk about inflammation, why it's so important. Guys, if you are chronically inflamed, you need to know where it's coming from, and you need to know why. Your body will never heal if it stays chronically inflamed, because it's always trying to heal the damage that you're actually causing. So whether it's weight loss resistance, whether it's cancer, whether it's problems with your hormones, infertility, and this is a big issue when it comes to infertility, because so many people are having problems conceiving and things like that. Thyroid disease, chronic arthritis, chronic joint pain, type 2 diabetes, any kind of autoimmune condition, or if you're having issues with hormone imbalance, you're going to realize it's the body not messing up. It's not making a mistake. It's adapting to the environment that you're putting it in. So you're from the Chicagoland area, guys. Please make sure that you go to this link right here. I'll put it up, and you'll find that on our Linktree profile. So you see, if you see our profile, if you're watching on Facebook, you'll see this profile up at the top. If you just click on that, the very first thing you'll see pop up is to get scheduled for the inflammation event. This is for Chicagoland people only, as you really need to be in the areas. I'm not working or accepting new patients right now remotely, especially. So get registered for it. It's an in-person event. Take you 60 seconds to get registered for it. And once you register for it, my staff will know, and they'll be reaching out to you in order to confirm that appointment. Very important for you to get started on your journey of restoration, and especially not manipulation, especially. In addition to that, we have Illinois thermography that's going to be coming to our office. This is Thursday, December 12th. So it's going to be this Thursday. And Cindy, who's just a phenomenal person, will be doing thermography in our office. So if you are interested in thermography, yes, I'm a big fan of thermography. Go ahead and just pause the video, take a screenshot of it, and you'll be able to see. You can call her and contact her directly to schedule your thermography appointment. We may be booked up. I'm unsure. She'll only know if we're booked up within our office, but she may be able to get you at a different Chicagoland location as well. So the number to reach her at is 815-482-6224. So get registered for that. Our next time in our office will be Thursday, December 12th. I believe from 3 to 5:30. I think that's what the time that we're going to be doing it as. And no, insurance doesn't cover it because this is about prevention. And insurance doesn't care about prevention. Insurance cares about you getting sick and then paying a boatload of money to manage it for the rest of your life. And I'll talk about how that actually kind of runs into GI issues and things like that. Okay. So let's talk about the causes of gastrointestinal disease. This is huge because there are a lot of people who have gastrointestinal disease. And if you were a colicky baby, make sure that you pay attention. I'm going to go over with you interesting research in regards to that. Okay. But first, this is coming from someone who had a lot of gastrointestinal issues growing up. But this was my story. And this is, unfortunately, it's a pretty common story that we don't look into deeper. So here's my story. So I started to get very sick after my pre-kindergarten well baby visit. If you don't know what goes on in a well baby visit, well, you can pretty much tie two and two together, because within a couple of days after my quote unquote well baby visit, which I got all of my required, I put that in parentheses because people think it's required, jibby jabbies, I developed terrible, terrible asthma. In fact, I had to be hospitalized for it. No one drew the connection between what I was caused with just a very irritated hyperimmune system response as a result. And I developed asthma. Doctor said, yep, you got asthma. You'll have it for the rest of your life. I no longer have asthma, mainly because I figured out what was causing it and stopped hyperstimulating my immune system, especially. So I developed allergies, and not soon long after that, I developed asthma and allergies, and I went on a lot of medications for it. In fact, they told me that I would be on medications for the rest of my life. So I developed asthma and allergies not long after I got my pre-K vaccinations, which was known as a well baby visit. You know, they weigh and they measure you, and then of course they do all that to get you in, and then inject you with a bunch of different things. And I got very chronically ill after that happened. And then on top of that, I also ate the standard American diet. So because I was suffering a lot of inflammatory triggers, I also developed a lot of ear infections. When I went on had ear infections, I went on antibiotics. And it wasn't that I went on one round of antibiotics. I was on multiple rounds of antibiotics. And if you know what antibiotics do to the gastrointestinal microbiome, how it kills everything off and allows for a lot of overgrowth to take place, I also developed after that, when I was about 11, 12 years of age, irritable bowel syndrome, in which, guys, I'm not afraid to tell you this because I have suffered just like a lot of you who are watching might have suffered as well. But I had irritable bowel syndrome, meaning I would have cramping, I would have diarrhea after every single time that I would eat. And then I developed terrible acne and then got very systemically inflamed by having a lot of chronic joint pain. And one of the sad things is this is very common. It's not normal. It's very common, but very few people are actually connecting the dots as far as say, let's get to the reason why that's happening. But I grew up with a lot of gastrointestinal issues, and no one was able to connect the dot until I started to connect the dot, started to apply the wellness way approach as far as what it comes to inflammation and why I had such terrible gastrointestinal issues. Now, I've had a lot of young individuals come in. And here's what's so concerning with ulcerative colitis, bleeding from in their stool, having, bleeding when they have bowel movements. And that just means there is a very inflammatory environment that's going on. And one of the things I think you can start to draw connections to is if you have a colicky baby. Okay. And I talked about this last week, but people say, hey, should you be concerned about colic? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Baby is in pain. There's a lot of gastrointestinal bloating that's going on. You need to figure out why that's happening. And this comes from PubMed, Nutrients of 2023 of January. So it's about almost 2 years old. Title of it is Infantile Colic and Long-Term Outcomes in Childhood, a Narrative Synthesis of the Evidence. And here's what they say: about 1 in 4 infants comes forward with prolonged crying, agitation, or infant colic, IC, during the first 3 months of life. 1 in 4 infants, if you can imagine that, and is referred for medical evaluation. Here's what they say: most studies display an association between infantile colic and the onset of functional gastrointestinal disorders years later. So if they have the problem going on, a lot of it is just poorly managed, and it just festers and starts to develop in a lot more serious issues going on with functional gastrointestinal disorders years later. probably related to the presence of common pathogenetic factors when they say environment, dietary, intestinal dysmotility, visceral hypersensitivity, big words just saying there's a chronic inflammatory response that's actually going on. But the interesting thing about this is they're basically saying we don't really know why it happens. We know that it does, and we know it leads to problems later on in life. Guys, they're just not looking into deeper on some of the things, looking at physiology as far as why it could happen as well. And here's the takeaway. In fact, I've looked at a lot of research on a lot of gastrointestinal issues, and the experts say this: we don't know the cause. We will manage your symptoms, and when that fails, we will remove the organ. Isn't that true? We don't know what's causing it. And in fact, when they say they don't cause it, the code word is saying it's genetic. Yeah, because when I had asthma and had allergies, everyone said, "Oh, it's just genetic. It's just genetic." Well, guess what? All 4 of my kids don't have a hint of allergies, don't have a hint of asthma, they don't have any of those issues yet. I passed on my genes to them as well. And most of medicine with chronic illness is just managing the symptoms. And then if that fails, then finally, if it gets sick enough, we can just remove the organ, which kind of makes you wonder what they do for persistent headaches. Terrible joke, I know, right? But the answer is that there is no answer. There's no long-term plan. There is no plan from the doctors other than to be on medication and to quote unquote manage it for the rest of your life. Let me ask you a question. Who wants their illness managed? I don't want my illness managed. I want it healed. And you're going to see that when people are so chronically ill, there's no answers for them. There's no restoration. It's just manipulate, let it get sicker and sicker. And then finally, well, we'll just remove the organ because, apparently you don't need it, like your gallbladder. And this is why, guys, this is why I talk about it, the inflammation talk, is that things won't heal if they stay chronically inflamed. If you have a scab on your knee, it's never going to heal if you keep injuring that over and over and over again. And this is why you need to figure out what you are doing to cause injury so that you can have resolution. And in fact, you don't need to do anything with that scab on the knee because the body knows how to heal it, but you do need to know that you need to stop injuring it. Most of what we're doing is that we're chronically injuring ourselves, and the doctor or the expert that led you to that is leading you into a disease process. And in fact, it just comes down to more medications for the rest of your life. I'm going to show you an awesome clinical example here in just a second. So what can cause a lot of gastrointestinal issues? Well, you have to look at physical, mental, chemical, like we do with everything else. But one of the first causes I will tell you has to do with physical trauma and how that involves your nerve system, which is why I say neurological. Okay. This is a picture of what you would call birth trauma. In fact, doctors don't even call it birth trauma. They call this a normal natural birth. And this can injure a baby's neck. And I'll tell you why that's so important. Because if I took your baby by the head and decided to drag them around by their head, you would slap me silly. Yet this is considered a normal birth process. And in fact, if you let it continue and you let it continue to fester, then one of the things that'll happen is that it will cause some issues with chronic stretching of the spinal cord, calcification, deterioration of the discs and things like that. But I will tell you, you have a division of your nerve system that's sitting right in through there called the vagus nerve, which is so interesting that doctors are actually looking into the vagus nerve as far as allowing healing to take place. And the vagus nerve is just part of the nerve system that helps you go into rest and digest. Okay. Rest and digest. And the reason why the nerve system is so important is because you have 2 divisions of your nerve system. You have the parasympathetic nerve system, which is involved in rest and digest. You have the sympathetic nerve system, which is involved in fight or flight. And when you're under chronic stress, that sympathetic nerve system gets activated. And here's what's so interesting about chronic activation of the nerve system or being in fight or flight. Look at what it does. It inhibits salivation. So if you notice, like you're getting ready to go and speak in front of thousands of people, or you're getting ready for a game or something like that, and you start going into fight or flight, you notice that you start to get a little bit of dry mouth. What it also does is it inhibits the activity of the stomach. So it inhibits the production of stomach acid, meaning once you get into fight or flight, the last thing your body wants to do is digest. But if you are eating a bunch of food and you're chronically stressed, that will cause an inhibition of stomach acid, which means you're going to get poor protein breakdown, which can cause a lot of gastrointestinal issues as well. And it will stimulate the release of glucose, which is why if your body's getting ready to run away from the bear, then you need a lot of available glucose in order to provide energy as well. And this is why Even some people, when they're chronically stressed, their blood sugars can just run elevated all the time. And even their A1C could be elevated. And this can be due to chronic stressors on the body or chronically being into fight or flight. Here's what's also interesting is that it inhibits the gallbladder. If you're in chronic stress or things like that, you're not going to get good gallbladder contraction. You're not going to get secretion of bile into the gastrointestinal system. And that can cause some other gastrointestinal issues as well. And it inhibits the activity of the intestines. And this is why it's so important. Why, when you eat, you really need to be into rest and digest. You need to be relaxed. You need to chew your food a bunch, because eating on the run, not seeing the food, not smelling the food, not chewing the food, all can cause problems long term when it comes to the gastrointestinal system. So that's if you are in fight or flight versus you being into rest and digest. Look at what happens. It stimulates saliva to help you start breaking down your food. It stimulates the gallbladder. Okay, so the gallbladder starts to contract. And if the gallbladder is contracting, it helps with prevention of the formation of stones within the gallbladder. It stimulates the activity of the stomach to be able to release stomach acid to help you break down your food, to help you sterilize your food. All those things are very, very important for you to be in, especially when it comes to the gastrointestinal system. So you got, and that's all, all directed by the nerve system. So it's all directed by the nerve system, which is why you get a lot of chronic spinal stress that will put your body in a state of fight or flight. And this is why, I've had people, like, you get them adjusted, you start correcting their spine. They're like, wow, I'm sleeping better. My digestive system is so much better. What kind of witchcraft is that? And it's like, it's just physiology. That's all that it is. So you got physical, neurological causes. Number two, you also have mental stress causes. So when you are carrying a lot of mental stress, all of those things put your body into a state of chronic fight or flight. And if you're in chronic fight or flight, you're going to have problems with low stomach acid. If you have problems with low stomach acid, you're going to not break your proteins down very well. Number one. Number two, you probably won't sterilize your food very well, which is why you can carry a lot of infection within the gastrointestinal system. And also, you probably don't have good motility within the gastrointestinal system, all those things that you need. And this is why chronic stress is an absolute killer. So it's an absolute killer. So you can have causes of mental stress as well. And this is why, when it comes to, and women typically stress out a lot more than men. It's just how you're built. This is why I got to talk to women a lot more when it comes to stress, because this could affect the gastrointestinal system so much more. So you got neurological, which would be physical causes. You got mental stress causes. And then you also have chemical causes. And I think this is playing probably the bigger role in those things, because I think this is where a lot of gastrointestinal system issues start, is actually chemically. So number one, I will say this: the introduction of foods in infants too early. This is why I say babies should be exclusively breastfed up until age 1. And then they start to develop, teeth, and to be able to break down, start to masticate and break down their food. This is why this is very important. But what's so interesting is you go back and they're saying, yeah, babies need to be on rice cereal at 3 months of age. And that was a recipe for disaster. This is why if babies are given formula, why they tend to have so much gastrointestinal distress, as well. So one of the most important things is that you should really exclusively breastfeed up until a year of age, because babies are born with a leaky gut, and that's by design. That's not a design flaw. That's supposed to happen. And then we go on lots of antibiotics that destroy our gastrointestinal microbiome, because antibiotics just don't kill off bacteria. They kill off even your beneficial bacteria within the gastrointestinal system. And this can cause some issues when it comes to overgrowth of certain bacteria, infection, the overgrowth of yeast. I mean, there's so many different things that can happen. And guys, I will say this: being someone who was on a lot of antibiotics growing up, I wouldn't want to go back to the day of not having antibiotics, but they were so overly prescribed, because as soon as, Johnny had, a sore throat or some kind of ear infection, parents were going in and demanding that they go on something, because if the doctor said, give it some time, it'll go away, then they were writing really bad Google reviews and, complaining to the manager in regards to that. So, but antibiotics can actually cause it. There's some other things that can cause a lot of gastrointestinal issues, and this is actually birth control. I have said this for years, and how birth control changes what happens within the gastrointestinal system. And then, if you eat the standard American diet, it's going to involve a lot of wheat, and it's going to involve a lot of wheat gluten. And the reason why, guys, that I talk about this like so much is because you're seeing so many people not react to wheat gluten very well. And in fact, a lot of times I tell people one of the first things to do is just to get off of wheat gluten. And the reason why is because wheat gluten is going to contain a high amount of Roundup. And you need to be familiarize yourself with Roundup, also known as glyphosate, because with a lot of wheat, especially just normal wheat that you're getting from the grocery store, is that it is sprayed with Roundup as a drying agent because it just dries out the wheat a lot quicker, causes it to die off a lot quicker so they can harvest it a lot quicker. But the problem is that the Roundup is directly on the wheat. It's directly on there. It doesn't have an opportunity to be able to wash off as well. So Roundup or glyphosate is a real big issue. And yes, I think this is why so many people are developing gastrointestinal issues. I think has a lot to do with the fact that we douse ourselves with a lot of bread, with a lot of wheat gluten, and especially it's been put into our food because it's used as a drying agent or a desiccating agent before it's harvested. So this comes from PubMed. This comes from interdisciplinary toxicology. And this is about 10, 11 years old. And this was actually authored by Stephanie Seneff. And this is really interesting what she talks about when it comes to glyphosate. It's called Glyphosate or Roundup, Pathways to Modern Diseases 2, Celiac Sprue and Gluten Intolerance. And they talk about the high amount of glyphosate that's in, that's in wheat, or that's in that's in wheat. And she talks about wheat gluten, or the specific protein that's going to be in wheat. And she talks about impaired CYP450 enzymes, iron deficiency, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, ultimately leading to infertility. And one of the things that's very important is, when we do Dutch testing on people, and you used to just see that some of their CYP enzymes that are involved in the metabolism of drugs, it's involved in the metabolism of your estrogens. And you just see that those things are just really wonky. And sometimes you got to ask the question, well, what on earth is actually causing this? And a wheat gluten or glyphosate that's on the wheat gluten can definitely be a contributing factor to it. Because these CYP450 enzymes, which you can measure on a Dutch test, one of the things you do, if you start seeing that you have higher amounts of how the liver is metabolizing some of these certain hormones, well, some of these CYP enzymes are definitely impaired. A lot of them are in the liver. They're even in the gastrointestinal system. And yes, women have a lot more of these enzymes than men. Okay, they have a lot more of these enzymes because they have a lot more hormones to be able to metabolize in order to bring them downstream to eliminate every single month. So the result is, when you have high amounts of stress, you got physical, mental, chemical sources, the result is going to be systemic inflammation. And what I mean by that is that it's not one thing that you can just pinpoint, is that your joints may get inflamed. You may have brain fog. You may have chronic fatigue. But the gastrointestinal system, once that starts to get inflamed and the small intestinal barrier starts to get inflamed and starts to break down, this is where you start to develop a lot of food allergy responses. And a lot of things that you'll see will be an IgG immune system response. You may also look around the gastrointestinal barrier and you see that the body is putting a lot of IgA antibodies, in which is saying, hold off, I'm super inflamed here. Let's try to keep things out as much as possible. But this is why you can start getting things like swelling. You can get things like bloating, a lot of water retention. But ultimately what it leads to is it leads to nutrient malabsorption. It leads to chronic systemic inflammation like autoimmunity, and no, the body's not attacking itself. You can develop a lot of food allergy, or what traditional allergists will call it food intolerance. These can cross the blood-brain barrier and can cause a lot of systemic inflammation. So these things are actually really real, guys, and they really do happen. And the reason why you really do need to take care of the gastrointestinal system is the gastrointestinal barrier is only one layer thick. That's it. So your skin is 4 to 5 layers, but your gastrointestinal is one layer thick. And if that starts to separate and you'll start to get a lot of food proteins that start to leak through. You'll start to get a lot of inflammation because the immune system is really responsible for going after proteins that don't belong there. Might be a toxin, that might be a food, that might be tissue injury, but that can come from a food protein as well. So when there's autoimmunity, I still one of the things that frustrates me the most is doctors still blame the immune system for attacking the organs. And so this is what just goes beyond me. And it's like when I ask people, well, when did it develop? Like, oh, well, it's like 35 years of age. And I'm like, so genetically, you were functioning fine. And then all of a sudden, genetically, your body said, okay, now it's time for your body to start attacking itself or attacking the thyroid or attacking the gastrointestinal system. Now's the perfect time. And this is where we get it so wrong, is that we blame the immune system for attacking the organs. And the immune system's not programmed to attack your organs or attack your thyroid or attack certain things. The immune system is just doing its job. And maybe you've lost a lot of barrier integrity and you're leaking a lot of proteins through. And when you leak a lot of proteins through, then it just becomes the immune system says every man for itself. And that's why you can start to develop a lot of systemic inflammation as well. So just remember this. If they go in with a camera and they look at your colon, they see that it's inflamed. Remember, the colon is the result. The colon is the result. So what happens is your beneficial bacteria start to die. You start to grow pathogenic bacteria just because the environment is going to favor it, or you can get yeast, or you may also call that a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The colon is also responsible for thyroid conversion, so you can even develop a thyroid issue as well. And because you're so systemically inflamed, your hormones start to downregulate. Start to do that, which is why a lot of women aren't going to feel very good. And then you can develop a lot of chronic inflammation within the colon. And this is why, guys, when you talk about colon cancer and you talk about all of that, it's like, look at the environment. If it's a highly inflamed environment, then the body is doing its best to try to adapt to it as much as possible. You can even do a stool test and look at certain what's known as beta glucuronidase. And if that's elevated, then you're going to have a lot of problems, especially women, in which you are trying to remove your hormones every single month. And as you start to remove those hormones in the small, and again, in the large intestines, just starts to cleave off and you start to reabsorb those estrogens, which is why, yes, it can cause estrogen dominance. This is why this is so important when it comes to good liver health, but it's also you need good gastrointestinal health as well. And yes, even kidney stones. Yes, this can be a result of kidney stones. So rather than just look at your colon and say, oh, my colon is not doing very good, you have to say, well, what's happening in my stomach? What's happening in my pancreas? What's happening in the duodenum? What's happening in the small intestines? And whatever happens downstream, if this is a bad environment up top, then the colon is just going to be, is going to result in being sick as well. It's just that this is where you might be actually experiencing the symptoms. And here's a perfect example when I talk about kidney stones. Here's an article from the American Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. And here's what they talk about. Oxalobacter may reduce the risk of calcium oxalate kidney stones. Isn't that interesting? Is that even bacteria that live within the colon, by having a healthy gastrointestinal microbiome and having proper, good gastrointestinal health, can actually reduce the risk of kidney stones that are made of calcium. And I remember I had a person, an individual, awesome guy, who had lost his gallbladder. Doctor decided to remove it, and, as a result, gained 75 pounds. And I did a stool test on him, and I saw that he basically had just a terrible microbiome and didn't have this specific type of bacteria. He ended up losing a lot of weight, which was awesome. But he also developed really bad kidney stones. I went back, looked at his stool test. I'm like, yeah, this has been going on for a long time. So this is why even the gastrointestinal system and good gastrointestinal health can contribute to even other things. This is why it can even contribute to things like gout, and it can contribute to kidney stones and things like that. This is why the gastrointestinal system is so important. But this is why we talk about the Swiss watch principle. This is why people are so frustrated when it comes to healthcare, is because You have one problem, you go to a gastrointestinal specialist, and all they look at is they look at the colon, then they try to manipulate the colon. Or if you have a skin issue, you just go to a doctor, to a um, you're going to a skin doctor, and they're doing one thing in order to try to improve the skin, but they're not taking the whole entire body into account. And this is why one of the things you have to take into account is how the body works. The body is working through the nerve system, and all of these other organ systems are playing a role in how all the other organ systems are actually functioning. And this is why, guys, if you want to get your health back, you have to look at how all those organ systems are working together. And this is why one of the things that's just so frustrating is when someone says, "I'm going to go to a specialist." And I'm like, you know what a specialist is? Someone who knows more and more about less and less until finally they're experts in nothing. So this is why going to an expert, I'm like, you know what they're going to do? Because even if you go to an expert, if you go to a specialist, what's their answer? Their answer is more drugs. Their answer is never to get your lifestyle under control. The answer is just more and more drugs, more and more medication. So what do you need to test for? You need to start testing for causes. And I want to give you a clinical example because here's an individual who had Crohn's disease. And of course, had Crohn's disease and developed it in her late 50s. So this wasn't something that she had for her whole life. I remember talking to her, I said, "What were you going through when you were diagnosed with Crohn's disease?" She said, "I was going through a tremendous amount of stress." And you can see how it was just ripping apart the gastrointestinal system. So finally it got so inflamed. Doctors go in with their camera and say, "Yep, this is Crohn's disease. You need to be on an immunosuppressant for the rest of your life." So initially, here's one of the things you saw. You saw a lot of protein in her stool, which meant she was low in stomach acid. It wasn't breaking down her proteins the way it's supposed to. A lot of fat in her stool. Again, gallbladder not working the way that it's supposed to. And this can be an effect of stress. And then you start seeing what happens as a result, start growing a bunch of extra bacteria. You can see that her gastrointestinal microbiome not good. Beta glucuronidase elevated through the roof. And you can just see that the gastrointestinal system was not doing very good. And then here's a retest. So here's a retest. You can see we started to get her protein breakdown under control, her gallbladder moving the way that it's supposed to. And then you can see how, if you look at this initial score of 16 down to 4, you can see how much that improved. And this was over the course of about 4 to 5 months. I know what you're asking. What's the protocol? I'm like, there is no protocol. It's individual for every single person, especially. But you know what the cool thing is? Being diagnosed with Crohn's disease and given a lifelong sentence of just go on these medications, there's nothing that you can do. She is almost off of every single one of her medications as a result. But what's so interesting is we did a food test on her, and you can see 29 food allergies. And then when we retested a year later, you can see how it went down to 17. And so she had a lot of gastrointestinal barrier issues that were going on. And even if you heal those up, some of these food allergies may hang around for 3 to 4 years just because of the amount of exposure that's gotten from poor protein breakdown, especially. And you can see how the number of allergies went down. And she's done a really, really good job of taking her health seriously. And the cool thing is she's almost off of all of her medications. And I know that probably this is what a doctor, let me digress for a little bit. A doctor should be absolutely thrilled that a person comes back and says, I don't need your medication anymore. But the problem is that so many doctors don't give anyone an exit strategy of saying, here's what you need to do to take control of your health in order to start getting things under control so that you don't need me in the same fashion for the rest of your life. I will actually say this: stop asking the fire department to do a carpenter's job. Okay. So people will ask me fire department questions. I'm like, I'm not the fire department. But a lot of times they'll say, well, how do I get this test from my medical doctor? And I'm like, that's like asking, the fire department how to rebuild your house. They may say that they know how to do it, but in reality, they don't. That's why you may need the fire department. There's no doubt about it. But you also need a carpenter. And this is what we are within the Wellness Way, is a carpenter. Because if you need the fire department, who's rebuilding your body? Who's rebuilding your health after that? Because you can't ask the fire department to do a carpenter's job. They just don't have the tools. They don't have the training to be able to do that. Okay. Now, I will leave you with this. If you want to be frustrated with healthcare, get chronically ill. And in fact, put in the comments, if you've been chronically ill and it makes you a little bit frustrated because you're given no hope, no future, no direction. It's just do this for the rest of your life. And I understand that because I have been someone who's been chronically ill and they never give you an answer. They just say, you just need to be on these drugs forever. And that's what frustrates people is, no, I want to be restored. I'm tired of being manipulated. I want to be restored. And yet they get no answer because they're going to the fire department when they really need to be going to the carpenter in order to restore, rebuild, and repair as well. This is why, guys, we do our inflammation talk, because people come in and they have been to the fire department so long, and the fire department has just kept putting out fires. And what happens when you keep putting out fires? And one of the things that happens is you start growing in a decaying, rotting house. And that's where, unfortunately, a lot of people step in and they want to rebuild their house, but they don't understand you're going to need to do a lot of work in order for that to happen. But guys, our next inflammation event is going to be Tuesday, December 10th. This is an in-person event. If you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure you go to our link tree and you can register for that right away. Please, guys, I will tell you this. I don't care that it's Christmas, because your body doesn't say, oh, it's Christmas, I think I'll put all these health issues on hold, because many times people get even more sick during this time because the stress goes up, because their diet just absolutely just goes in the toilet. And, people say, well, I'll do it afterwards. No, the best time to do it is right now. Okay. Here's my final thought. If you're waiting for the perfect time, there is none. If you're waiting for the perfect time, there's no such thing as a perfect time, because eventually it will choose it for you at a time that's very inconvenient for you. So guys, quit waiting for that perfect time, because the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. And the next best time is to do it right now. And that's why I want you to get registered for that inflammation event, and get registered in December when most people are just falling asleep, letting their health decline. Be a bigger person, saying, you know what, today's the day I'm going to start to take a step. I'm going to start to move in the right direction. Here's another final thought. Do you suffer from immature thinking? Immature thinking says, oh, I need to. Mature thinking says, I must. And the reason why I came up with this is because, being in the gym business and owning a gym, I would have people come in and they would be like, they would look at everything like, oh, I really need to start working out. And I knew that they never, ever would come in, and they wouldn't, because they would always say, I need to. But if you change your thinking to, I must, and there's nothing that's going to get in my way of me achieving health and getting better, then I know that you're in the right place, and that I know that you're going to get better as well. So quit doing that I need to, and just say, I must. That's the difference between immature thinking and mature thinking as well. So the causes of GI disease, we went over physical, mental, and chemical, that the colon is the result, and some of the biggest reasons why. But the biggest thing from talking about this, what I want you to do is get registered for the inflammation event coming up. That's going to be Tuesday, December 10th. It's a week from tomorrow. Get registered for it. Go to that Eventbrite link and get registered for it. Most importantly, don't just register, but make sure that you are showing up. And I always tell people too, if you're going to show up, be prepared to change your life. That's one of the biggest things. Is I don't do this for, giggles and for laughs and for entertainment. I do it as the first step in order to change your life. So get registered for that right now, because you know that you need to. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, get registered for that event. I can't wait to see you guys. I'll be live tomorrow, not tomorrow, but next week, next Monday. Give me a topic that I should talk about for next Monday, and we'll go further into health. We'll go further into wellness. But make sure, guys, if you enjoyed this, make sure that you share this with other people. And if you haven't subscribed to our podcast or to our page, make sure that you do that as well. I appreciate all your comments. I appreciate all your shares. I appreciate, guys, of listening, most importantly. But most important than listening is actually getting down and actually doing it. Start doing it. That's the most important thing. So, guys, I appreciate all of you. I wish you the best. I look forward to seeing a lot of you at our next inflammation event that's going to be coming up next Tuesday. Be well, be blessed. And as I always say, remember who you are. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening and a great continuation of your week. All right. Be well.